Just kidding.
All right, well, good thing I got the kinks out. I was like, where's that noise coming from?
We're good to go now, Rob says.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Thanks, sorry about that. Okay, so I guess we'll try this again. We'll call the Housing and Economic Development Committee meeting to order on Wednesday, January the 3rd. It is 3:01 p.m. We have Legislator Pillar and Koreman joining us remotely. Can you guys hear us okay? All right, great. And we've got Travis Brooks and Mike Sigler here in chambers. Do we have any public comment today?
We do not.
Okay. Any changes to the agenda from members of the committee? Nope. Okay. Sorry, I got to remind myself to look up and over at the folks on the screen. If we could do the minutes from December 6th, if I could have a motion to approve those. Moved by Travis, seconded by Veronica. We'll go ahead and do a roll call because we do have both virtual and in-person participation. Ann Koreman?
Yes.
Veronica Pillar?
Yes.
Travis Brooks?
Yes.
Mike Sigler?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Those passed unanimously. I do not have a chair's report, but I just do want to say as the last meeting of this iteration of HED, thank you to everybody for a productive year. This was the first year the committee was back after a brief hiatus. I think it was a good learning year and enjoyed working with everybody, and hopefully we can continue a lot of the great same work into 2024, but we'll wait to see what committee assignments look like and things like that as our leadership makes those decisions over the next couple of weeks. But I just wanted to thank everybody for their participation, and then also to the staff and advisory boards and everyone else who is a part of the conversation here on a regular basis. County Administrator's Report. We have Bridget.
Thank you, Greg.
Sure. No
report from County Administration today.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're moving right along. Let's have our friends from the Continuum of Care. We've got Liddy and Simone here today. You're welcome to join a seat at the table. If you do sit in front of a table and there's a name placard there, if you could just put that down on the desk so not to misrepresent anybody, that would be great. Liddy, did you want to join the Zoom meeting, or do we just want to review what's here in paper?
I have my presentation on a flash drive.
Okay.
That has just entered
Excellent.
our door. Is that useful?
Dominic, can you help? Would you be able to help with that? Sure. Great. So our next agenda item is homelessness and housing. We want to have a shelter discussion. Bridget, do you maybe want to touch on the release that went out? I'll give you a second maybe to pull that up. And so we want to have a discussion with our friends from the Continuum of Care and set some baseline for some terms and what it means to be a low barrier shelter as we explore different options within the county. But Bridget?
Yep, that's right. So a week or two ago, we did put out a release essentially outlining the fact that we at the county are seeking to increase our capacity for beds to better serve our unsheltered and unhoused neighbors. Part of the research that we've been doing has been looking into perhaps exploring what is called a low barrier shelter, which I think Liddy will be able to do a deep dive into what that looks like.
Great. Cindy, since you just joined us too, if you wouldn't mind just taking Amanda's name plate down. And then if you all just want to introduce yourself real quick while Dominic's pulling up the presentation. and your roles, that would be great.
Hi. Hi, I am Cindy Wilcox. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Services Coalition. HSC is the lead agency for the Tompkins County Continuum of Care. I'm also the co-chair of the Continuum of Care.
Hello, my name is Liddy Barger. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Housing Initiatives at Human Services Coalition. As part of my role, I coordinate the Continuum of Care.
My name is Simone Gatson, and I use they, them pronouns. I work as staff for the Continuum of Care and the coordinated entry lead for the county. I really just support a lot of the work that we do as a Continuum of Care. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. And just want to say, I mentioned, I think at the last HED meeting, it was summits that you all put on just before the holiday break, was fantastic. Really excellent. I think it left a lot of people excited for the possibilities, frustrated with maybe the current condition, and a desire to do more. And so I think it was a great way to kick off a new year of conversation on how to help some of our most vulnerable population. So really appreciate all the work that went into that. I know you had some speakers come from different areas, and it was just, it was really informative, and I love the opportunity to collaborate on that second day with other folks and key stakeholders in the conversation. So thank you again for all that work. I know it's probably a lot. So Lydia, I guess I'll turn it over to you now if you want to sort of walk us through, and then members of the legislature in chambers have this presentation on their desk as well.
Great. Sure. So, hello. I have been on holiday, so I'll bear with me. I'm happy to be here today. I'm happy to be talking about low barrier shelter. I do want to just have a little preamble to say that much of the content in today's presentation is sourced directly from National Alliance to End Homelessness, and really is kind of at this system level, not super local, not getting into the nitty-gritty of details. I'm not talking about program planning. I'm not talking about citing a location. So this is it's actually like you say deep dive, but I'm actually going to call it more of a shallow flyover.
Some level setting.
Yes. I just wanted to be fair about that,
Sure.
or, to be clear about that. And I really, these are some critical components, leading practices. It's complicated. There's a lot of people doing it a lot of ways. And my hope is that this is the very beginning of a conversation and there will be more in the future. I just felt like that was worth saying.
Thank you.
This is the mission of our Continuum of Care. Ithaca, Tompkins, New York 510 is a cross-sector planning body. We have over 30 people in our membership. Membership is not-for-profit folks, government, private citizens, people with lived experiences of homelessness, business owners, landlords. We aim to have sort of full representation of a thriving community within the Continuum of Care. We do some planning work. We also are a mechanism that brings some amount of funding from HUD into our community, and we promote access to supportive services and affordable housing. So what is an emergency shelter? I think that actually this definition is pretty important just in terms of keeping the right language in our mouths as we're having these important conversations. So things that emergency shelter is housing. So it is not housing, it's not transitional housing, it's not permanent housing, it's designed to be an emergency response in which somebody can, quickly exit unsheltered homelessness and then transition into housing sort of as quickly as possible. So shelters let people, get some rest, get access to food, get access to additional services, but it's never, an emergency shelter is never the end of somebody's journey through homelessness. Rarely is it the beginning either, to be fair. This is a slide that comes from our original Home Together Tompkins plan, and It's just a sort of rethinking low barrier shelter. We're going to actually dive into all of these a little bit more throughout the course of our presentation, but these are sort of the top 4 things that you're going to be thinking about as you're thinking about what is a low barrier shelter, what isn't a low barrier shelter. Providing easy access to entry into shelter, and I do want to sort of like temper that by saying, and not just the initial entry into shelter, but being able to maintain a shelter stay for people who need a little bit longer in that emergency shelter space. So providing that easy access by lowering barriers for entry, reducing sanctions, reducing the need to pay, and other known barriers across many systems, not just our own. Having clear and simple behavioral expectations. So this is about shifting the focus to providing behavioral expectations for folks who are staying in that space versus hard and fast compliance factors. So shifting the emphasis to be around safety for folks that are in that space and reducing some of the compliance-driven rules that are present in existing shelter systems everywhere. Using a trauma-informed operating culture, I feel like that one sort of speaks for itself, but really in our system and everywhere, people who are experiencing homelessness, the most, it's not a monolith. There's many reasons that people are experiencing homelessness, but a very common thread throughout them all is trauma, recognizing that homelessness in and of itself is a traumatic experience and approaching folks using that trauma-informed lens versus some of that us-them stuff that can happen right now. Relaxed sobriety and curfew measures. So that doesn't mean like, woo, wild party all day, but it does recognize that those sobriety and curfew compliance rules that are in place in shelters everywhere now do limit people from being able to access those shelters and from moving on in their journey towards housing, right? So if they can't come and go for jobs or other reasons, or if sobriety is something that they need to address later on in their life, they never get started if they can't get in the door. Okay, so these are the critical components of a low barrier shelter per the National Alliance to End Homelessness, pretty much. So housing first approach. We have talked a lot about housing first in this space, other spaces, anybody who had the opportunity to come to the summit. In this context, housing first is the same. So housing first says that all persons are housing ready and that people need to be able to access permanent housing with those rights of tenancy as quickly as possible to end their experience of homelessness, and then wrap services around them to address any other needs that they may have. This is a critical component to low barrier shelter because it begins to shift the belief and the whole sort of process for folks by screening them sort of into shelter with this belief that they're going to be able to enter into housing does move people along in that process effectively. So again, we integrate that into emergency shelter by having that sort of universal positive regard that people are able to enter shelter. We do have supports available to support people when they enter shelter. And this is all work we have to do in our system, right? We actually might not have all of the things we need for a perfect system yet, to be fair. But that is why housing first that's why we're talking about housing first in an emergency shelter conversation. You know, really, in theory, in a truly thriving system, there would be a very low need for emergency shelter, really at all, because people could quickly enter into permanent housing straight from an episode of homelessness. We know that our system can't accommodate that yet. Critical component 2, safe and appropriate diversion. So Diversion is sometimes it's easy to conflate or confuse with prevention, homelessness prevention, but it's different. So homelessness prevention is sort of at that 30, 60, 90 days away from a person's potential experience of homelessness. You're bringing in services or financial resources or whatever in an effort to prevent that homelessness. Diversion is considered to be front door services that aim to stabilize a person in a safe, appropriate location without them ever actually entering into an emergency shelter setting at all. So diversion can look a lot of ways. Some of it is money. Some of it are these problem-solving, motivational interviewing style conversations with people where they really assess their strengths and what they have and what they need and work together to create a solution for the person in which they actually do not enter emergency shelter at all. It could look like going straight into a permanent supportive housing program. It could look like doing, mediation with a family member where a relationship has broken down. It can look a lot of ways. It could look like coming up with the money for the person to very quickly enter into their own housing. We integrate that into an emergency shelter practice because while we do want to screen people in and not out, if we can quickly and effectively prevent a person from entering emergency shelter by stabilizing them in something more permanent, we have done better than just letting them into the emergency shelter. Critical component 3 is the immediate and low barrier access. So low barrier access, I just used this phrase in the last part of my presentation, but it can be summarized as screening people in instead of out. So in a thriving, well-resourced system, a low barrier shelter is going to be heavily prioritizing folks who have barriers accessing traditional resources. So that's going to look like people who are coming from unsheltered locations, people who have sanctions or other known barriers to entering shelter should, in theory, be the priority. Those are people who have had difficulty accessing a range of services, right? And without a long application process. Some of the other things that people talk about in this component, actually this might be on another slide, but is making sure that people don't have to sign up every day and wait for a bed. And there's a lot of ways that you can create immediate and low barrier access that still has a prioritization system involved in it. Especially when you're thinking about a brick and mortar, if that's what and people are thinking about, sort of like a brick and mortar location, there is some quantity of those beds. And there will, even in a low barrier shelter, need to be some method of prioritization developed that prioritizes immediate and low barrier access to the people who need it the most. Oh yes, here's some of that stuff we were just talking about. So being open 24/7 is a way to create immediate and low barrier access. No drug or alcohol testing, no criminal background checks. In the circles that talk about these things, they talk about the 3 Ps of low barrier shelter. Those 3 Ps are partners, pets, and possessions. So those are the things that people really care a lot about being able to have with them as they're accessing emergency shelter. So figuring out how to do that for people. There's more on that list. The next component I sort of talked about at the beginning, but is this housing-focused rapid exit model. So first of all, a belief that people can exit to housing and a strategy to work with people basically from day one to figure out how that person is going to transition all the way into their permanent housing. It keeps the emergency shelter spaces open for new people who needs to come into them, and it just, the longer a person spends in emergency shelter, the more trauma they're experiencing, because as I may have mentioned, just experiencing homelessness itself is traumatic for people. So sort of shifting emergency shelter into thinking about, some people call it housing navigation, that's not really the best word, but emergency shelter being a place where you can quickly come, be served quickly with like a bed and a meal and immediate access to housing resources. Component 5, you could have guessed, I would say, data. So you're going to want to know where you're starting and how having the low barrier shelter is or isn't affecting your system. An ideal system has a short length of stay in an emergency shelter, a low amount of returns to emergency shelter, and increasing exits to permanent housing. There's a way that data sometimes gets used in the emergency shelter that focuses solely on exits, just exits alone, and doesn't sort of parse out those positive exits versus not positive exits. So just having people exit emergency shelter doesn't do your system very much good. You want them exiting into permanent destinations. If you're just trying to lower your length of time homelessness, so you just exit people back out into homelessness, you're not really solving the problem. So you want to figure out where you are, what data, what metrics you're measuring, and how this is impacting them. Thank you.
That was the deepest shallow dive I've ever had, so thank you.
Flyover.
Yeah, it was a flyover, yes. Yes, we flew low and high.
Low and high. I mean, I'm trying to stay high. I could get low, but I think it's high is the place to start.
It's a great place to start. I have a question, but I will also open it up to members of the committee first for any questions or comments. This is an opportunity for us to discuss any of these points and understand how maybe in a potential system such as Tompkins County, what may be some challenges or some roadblocks, what might be some opportunity areas. So just want to open it up for any questions first from anybody. Mike?
Well, I mean, obviously this low barrier shelter will be, I mean, it'll be split up by sex, it'll be split out by age groups. How do you envision that?
I don't know. Oh, that was the other preamble I wanted to make. I'm going to say I don't know probably a lot today, because there are not answers to questions like that yet.
Is there a best practice?
Well, yes. The best practice is to have people sharing spaces with the people that they are choosing to share spaces with, which is part of that partners section. So same-sex couples should be allowed to stay in a room together. Heterosexual couples should be allowed to stay in a room together. Families should have their own space. Single-gender emergency shelter doesn't totally meet the criteria of low barrier. But there are many ways to think about spaces. And there is no actual space, so I don't have an answer.
I mean, what drives the question is when you say no criminal background check to get in, I don't.
Like
Yes,
sex
I don't
offender
see-
registry stuff, I think.
Oh, there's that, or there's abuse against women, you couldn't have a mix. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles there. I'm not really sure how to clear them.
Sure. I mean, I think that's probably going to be a relevant part of the conversation. Currently, there's no background. I mean, there's not a criminal background check actually in our system either. Our current shelter, yeah. Like they're not running people for warrants or.
Right.
Right.
But is that a single-sex shelter?
No.
Oh, it is? Okay.
But obviously, safety is
Safety.
the utmost priority, and
Safety is the thing that is the safety for everyone. Safety for staff and safety for the people who are staying in the space is like the guiding.
like safety first.
Safety first. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But safety is an interesting, well, just quickly, I'm
Yeah, let's go
sorry,
there. No,
I
go there.
digress.
Go there. No.
So during the summit planning, actually, I was in a conversation with a woman, Amy LaFontaine, who is the executive director of Joseph's House in Troy, New York, which is a low barrier shelter. we were having this conversation about safety. And she said something which is like so simple, but has rung in my mind many, many times since then is, basically every day with her staff, she has them sort of run through an exercise of, do I feel unsafe or do I feel uncomfortable? Because those are different things. And then sometimes it's like, do I feel unsafe or do I feel like my property is unsafe, which is a different conversation as well. So safety has a lot of meanings to different people. And so when you're talking about safety, it's important to have a shared understanding of what safety is among the group of people who are talking about the safety, right? Like you and I might have different ideas of what is safe.
Well, yeah, likely, for sure. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting exercise. I mean, I think the way that that was framed,
Yeah.
right, around do I feel safe or am I uncomfortable? Because sometimes having a space to have that I'm uncomfortable conversation could help you become more comfortable.
Right. And they're just different things,
Sure.
but it's easy to categorize discomfort as an unsafe feeling and treat it as such when it might not be that,
So as I sort of look through this conversation, I want to sort of think of takeaways as we're shaping the conversation of any possibilities we have at the county. So first takeaway is safety first. And how do we define safety for those involved in the conversation at the moment? Travis.
Well, in that same vein, in a perfect scenario, you would be able to create different options, right?
Absolutely.
So I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea that there's one thing you can do that fits all, and there's just not. So in a perfect situation, you're creative and you have options to meet everybody's needs. And so maybe in a new shelter, it's bigger and you can accommodate families and this and this and that. And then maybe in this shelter, you can accommodate folks that you may have concerns with safety needs or maybe they're on the sex offenders list. But at the end of the day, if you do that, you can meet everybody's needs.
That's right.
At some point, when you were talking about transitioning and getting people to next levels of housing, I know for some of the programs I'm involved in, the issue is those next levels don't exist. And so people get bottlenecked into the first level. And even though a shelter is not permanent housing, it almost seems like it's used as permanent housing because we just don't have the systems to get people through. Again, I think that's a lack of creativity on the county's part, the city's part, and those involved in this. People are waiting for the developer to come in and say, hey, I'm going to sink X amount of money into this project and fix your problems, instead of us being as creative as possible to figure out how to solve this issue.
I apologize, Veronica and Annie. I don't know who went first, but I'll default to Veronica because she's in the middle.
Annie went first, actually.
Okay, so Annie, we'll go to you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So some of the stuff that my thoughts were already mentioned by Travis, but just thinking about the flexibility and wanting to have flexibility. I'm in my head, I'm like thinking, well, kind of like those office cubicles that you could actually move, although there's probably state not that we would do cubicle type things, but like walls that you could move. But I'm sure there's state requirements, that we can't just flex space as much, but I don't know. But I like what people are saying about being creative. I would also like to know if there's some models, because just trying to balance between meeting people's needs and as best we can, and also looking at the urgent need that we have. So trying to figure out how to balance that. And as was said, I don't have the answers, but I am definitely, I guess my question is, how do we even start, and maybe there's no answer for that, but how do we even start to look at this? And do we want to have all levels in place, or is it, do we go at the folks most at risk? Do we focus on the people to help that are at risk for homelessness and work at the diversion programs? And what, do we have many programs that help with the diversion so that people don't wind up homelessness? So I guess it brings up a lot of questions, but I really like the some of the things that were mentioned that I hadn't really thought about before, with couples being able to stay together no matter what their gender or what they identify with. If we look at, okay, so we're going to have males over here in one section and females over there, you know, there's more than two genders. So it really, I guess, for me, brings up more questions. So I don't really have a question. I'm just, except like, yeah, how do we even start to take a bite out of this? So thank you.
Any thoughts on the bite? What's the first bite?
I have a small bite. I have a nibble. Yes.
Okay.
That is Home Together Tompkins. So what you just sort of like put, touched on each of the major components of the Continuum of Care strategic plan, which is bolster prevention, bolster diversion, increase permanent housing, and make a place where people can be in an emergency situation to answer the urgency of people living outdoors. So that's my bite.
So just to piggyback on this question really quick, and then Veronica, I'll get to you. Obviously, we know we don't have every piece of this puzzle, ladder, whatever we're looking, system. The system pieces are not all in place. But that doesn't mean that we should not start on whatever piece of the system we can accomplish in the moment.
Correct.
Okay, could you just say that in the microphone again? Nice
Well,
smile.
yes, I would agree. I'm sorry, apparently I have many things to say. Yes, and answering the urgency of unsheltered homelessness with a low barrier shelter is a great place to start. Like we all know, we've all been in Tompkins County for many years at this point, having the same conversations about the encampment, enforcement, and all of those pieces. And if that is a problem our community wants to solve, a low barrier shelter is a good place to start solving that problem.
And from there, we build.
And then from there, we build.
Great.
And we learn. So the other thing is, like, we need to listen to the voices of people who we hope to be accessing this space, because we will learn as we go. Things like, you're going to want a bike rack. There's something I already know, but you might not think about when you're designing a thing until you realize everybody who's coming here has a bike and there's nowhere to put them, and we're overrun with bikes. But if we just listen to people who are going to be in the space, they'd be like, you got a bike rack? So those are the kinds of things. Sorry.
Veronica, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I guess on the topic of more than two genders, quick point of personal privilege, I'm preferring they, them pronouns now, and this hasn't always been the case, but it would be great if people could use those for me as opposed to she, her. I mostly agree with things that people had said. Travis said one of my points better than I could have, that like, I think sometimes we're trying to struggling to envision one thing that could possibly capture all the needs in one, but that's not what we're going to make, just one thing. And also something I think of, kind of bouncing off what Liddy just said, is that when it's also easy to think of how, like, but if we just do one thing, that won't be enough for this whole system. But you know, you got to start somewhere, or like, it's not like we have literally nothing in this county. But so you got to like continue somewhere. And when I think of, just adding a low barrier shelter that won't even work for everyone quite is not enough, I compare it with the status quo, which is also not enough. And that's also just what we get more and more and more of if nothing changes. I had one question, which is, I feel like often when this has come up in a county setting talking about shelters, there there's sort of a, maybe not an elephant in the room, but a thing that keeps popping up is DSS regulations and how, but the county, it seems like there is an assumption that the county can only engage in shelter provision according to the rules, I guess, not DSS, but like whatever the state regulations are that trickle down into our county DSS. And so, for example, surely it's impossible to have a shelter where people are DSS sanctioned because the county can't do that. Can someone disabuse us of that myth or explain what the bounds are on it and how this can work anyway? I guess I'm not literally looking at Lydia, I can't see you, but.
There's Cindy and Bridget both reaching for microphones.
Yes, I would defer to Bridget.
Yeah, and this is, we don't currently have somebody from DSS here in this meeting, but to my knowledge, it's all tied to the way that the state reimburses us for sheltering individuals. So because the individuals are required to apply for the assistance in order to be sheltered, if they are sanctioned or don't otherwise meet those requirements, we are not able as a county to seek the state reimbursement for sheltering them. It does not prohibit the county from using local dollars to shelter individuals. During the Code Blue season, which we're all familiar with, those requirements are essentially totally lifted. And that's when we see the influx of individuals who seek shelter during the cold because those requirements are no longer in place and the state is reimbursing us for all costs associated with sheltering those individuals. Does that make sense, Veronica? Okay.
And Bridget, just to follow up, Code Blue is October through April?
I believe so. Is it end of October, end of April?
But really, it's any time
Yes,
it's
that's
32
true.
degrees. So if
Well, we typically, as a county, we run for about 6 months with Code Blue. And is it OTDA, Office of Temporary Disability Assistance? Okay. 24 months in and going strong. Got my first acronym down.
Is your glossary tucked away somewhere from this?
It is not. It is not. So OTDA is the one that's responsible at the state level for reimbursing counties. So I think we as a legislature have to make a budgetary decision of investing local dollars potentially until we can convince our partners at the state level that this may be another way to solve this issue rather than, so on that vein, I will go with the question of why has the state not adopted this as a model?
Good question.
Yeah.
Progress.
They're learning and growing and looking at data and listening to their providers.
Well, and they are, right, a provider now. Sorry, Simone. So from what I understand, right, OTDA, Office of Temporary Disability Assistance, is actually the balance of state continuum of care. So they are now in the role of planning for homeless response, and they're seeing where their own regulations are butting up against them being able to do that COC job. So I think there's definitely been some progress at that.
Rowan, did you have something you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess that if we look at the history of the system, right, it's a lot of the compliance-based measures around having to pay a certain amount of money or having to actively be looking for housing or having to make these appointments, right, it's really a culture shift is what we're looking at right now. And that's like what Liddy was saying about Home Together Tompkins. It's understanding that we do have an ability as a system to make our system easier for people to navigate, as opposed to expecting people to show that they're worthy or able to navigate that system. So I think it's it's a culture change that might happen sooner, it might happen later, but I do think that that's where we're headed overall. But it's like, to be honest about why those things exist and why it's taken so long, it is the culture, this idea that people should have to show that they deserve this or that they can be accountable, or that's like the whole idea behind a lot of these compliance-based measures, which is why a low barrier shelter instead takes away those compliance-based measures and brings in these behavioral expectations and safety. Like, that's really the key component there, is instead of having to focus on complying with your shelter stay, you can now focus on being safe and acting in a way that is also safe for your neighbors and finding housing, which ends homelessness faster than fighting to maintain your shelter stay week by week.
Great point. Travis?
I'm glad you said that, because I've heard the word data mentioned a few times, and trying to get people to shift off of their personal beliefs and what they think is best and what they've heard for years and look at data-driven practices that are rooted in the data. I was wondering at some point in time, and maybe you already have this information, is it possible to maybe find different opportunities that have been created around the country for cities that are similar to Ithaca, like 5 opportunities that the data shows that this works, so people can start to see what those opportunities look like? I think sometimes when we have this conversation, we envision what we know. We think of a bigger St. John's. We think of this, but we don't really have, our minds don't turn to what we haven't seen already, what we haven't viewed. So if people could see what has worked, what's been done, and the data shows this actually does work. All you have to do is this, and this can work for folks. Because I think people have to, people can't hear words and see a picture all the time. They need to see a picture and understand what this looks like, so they could kind of move from that position. And I definitely think, as far as like legislators and other people who make decisions, to be able to hear from the most impacted by this, right? Like when we were, a group came in and talked about what they needed, a group of folks, that lived at, I forget the name of it, at Carmen's Place in Newfield. Right, when they came, thank you. When they came and presented, legislators were like, oh, wow, right? When some of us went and listened to focus groups from people that had been in and out dealing with incarceration, it opened up their minds more. So, like, hearing from those that are most affected, I think that allows people to really, like, understand how people are actually impacted by these decisions or lack of decisions.
Well, one of the things I took away from the summit was one of the speakers in one of the breakouts said something, that they were working with somebody who had a struggle with addiction, and they said they only realized that it was a problem once they had stability, right? And it's really interesting that we're, our system is sort of set up to, like, you need to be stable and then we'll house you, but you don't really have space to realize that maybe these aren't the best choices, or this isn't the right path to go down, until you have, Simone, to your point, the safety and the space to be able to have that recognition within oneself. Annie.
Thanks. First, I'll just mention really quick, when I worked in mental health, one of my colleagues had this, what they thought was a great idea. Oh, we're having people come in and we're going to help them break their nicotine habit. And they learned, after a while, well, now is not the time. They needed to stabilize, with their mental health issues. So those are good points. And I want to emphasize what was just said about, like, I learned so much from going to hearing folks that were at Second Wind, but going there and seeing the facilities there, the little homes that they had, talking to the people that lived there, what they needed, and what worked for them, what didn't work. And also a few, 3, 4, 5 years back, some of us went on a tour of our current homeless shelter, our current shelter, emergency shelter. And so I think that is really important, plus the data driven. So my mantra is yes and. So all of those things, plus one other thing I was thinking about that might be helpful is some type of template or hierarchy, something that we could say, here's what we're going to be needing. So here's this chart or something that says, here's all the different aspects we're going to need. Here's the one we're taking a bite out of right today, right now, because I think in addition to it being hard to wrap our minds around this, I don't want us to forget that we're doing one part, and then right as soon as we have bandwidth, we have to work on whatever bite we're taking next. Thank you.
I think using the Home Together plan as what it is, a strategic plan, a plan. And again, not everyone has to agree with it, not every piece, right?
That's right.
We just, at the legislature, this has been on top of my mind lately, we just got to get to 8, right? Just got to get 8 people on board, and everybody else will come along. We'd love if it was 14-0, but it's not always the case. So I think looking at that plan, because no strategic plan are you going to get everybody in the community to be 100% behind. We just need to make sure that we have enough people on board. And I think having these conversations as often as possible, and each time getting a little bit deeper and deeper will be helpful. Are there other questions from members of the committee? Any other comments? Mike? No? I don't know if that was
Well, my only big comment that came out of the big conference was when the one person had said, like, we should take care of we can't do the low-hanging fruit first, and that just seemed odd to me. That was it would seem like if you did the low-hanging fruit, you could literally house about 80% of the people, and then we have that top 20% that it's going to be, and that 20% is always going to be more difficult. And I don't know, I found that to be an interesting, I get what she was saying.
Yeah.
But I didn't find it to be all that practical of a.
I think you can do low-hanging fruit at the same time.
Yeah.
If it's that low-hanging, just pick it up on your way,
Right.
honestly. And actually, the Home Together includes some amount of both low and high-hanging fruit. And I think that there's a reason for that, and that is that some people like to get started right away on that low-hanging fruit, and there's low-hanging fruit, I assure you, and other parts of the system are ready to do that big, high-hanging, tiny fruit.
I think if we're talking about takeaways from the conference, my other favorite one was services need to be robust and irresistible. Right, I think that's what we really need to strive as a county to create, is an environment that people recognize is temporary, but is there for them however they come, whenever they come, that there's a place where somebody's just going to care. And we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah, that would be great.
That's my goal, to try to work towards something like that, and I hope that there's other legislators that'll get on board with trying to achieve that goal as well. Any last comments from either members of the committee or from all of you? Travis?
I would say one of the things that the county needs to keep in mind is, I think a lot of times we try to do things as inexpensive as possible, right? And I think that when you look at folks that work in this area, most of the time they're overworked, underpaid, and they can't stick around. There's a lot. The burnout, the caseloads, what you deal with, what you see. When you're talking about paying somebody $25,000, $30,000 a year to do this work, it's not sustainable. And so when we look at putting money into this, there's the housing issue, but there's also the workforce. And people have to get paid for what they do. This isn't easy work by any stretch of the imagination. I know one time we were talking about bringing in social workers. It was a program we were trying to set up between the city and county to work with folks that were struggling in certain areas, and we wanted to pay them 35 grand a year. Like, it just doesn't work. So the money has to go to the people that are tasked to work in this area and for the housing solutions. We can't just have people do it for free. Like, it just doesn't work that way.
Yep.
I'm not laughing. It's just, I just love yep, we're right there with you. This is what we've been saying.
I think there's some opportunities, I'm sorry, because I know you have other matters at hand here, but I think there's some opportunities as we begin to transform our system, which it really does feel like we're starting to do here in our community. There are opportunities for our workforce that include peers and people who have previously navigated the system becoming part of our workforce. Also, as we solve our affordable housing crisis, it will complement our workforce crisis, because part of our workforce crisis is that people can't afford to live in the town where they work. And so as we're adding to our affordable housing stock, and workforce housing is sort of like not a real term, but workforce housing stock, that it is going to ease some of that workforce, but it doesn't cure burnout. But having a low barrier shelter, one of the things that burns people out, just very quickly, is saying, no, I don't have anything for you. There's nothing for you. I worked in direct service for many years. It kills you to be like, sorry, go sleep out. You want to come indoors? Not tonight. You know, that will burn you out faster than anything. So adding a place where for providers to be able to send people to who are seeking those services, that it's like trauma-informed and warm and inviting and all of those things, actually will a little bit relieve some of that burnout that we're seeing in our system right now. Because right now it's a lot of no. This would add a yes.
For a lot more people.
For more people.
All right, well, if there's no other comments on the topic, I appreciate it. This was a good discussion. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of pieces in motion, and as more becomes known and there's progress made, hopefully we'll be able to share it here and continue that collaboration. But I really appreciate all the work that you do on behalf of the county and the community and all of those that really need what we're trying to figure out the most, because everybody should have a place. So, and my other favorite takeaway was, it's not the people that aren't ready for the housing, it's the system that's not ready for the people. And I think as we start to transform our system, we're going to be in a much better spot. And this is the small steps, because we won't have a perfect system on day one, but we need to lay the foundation to do that. So thank you for your time.
Happy New Year.
Thanks, you as well. All right, well, next up, Elliot, come on down. We have Planning and Sustainability Department. We have a resolution, budget adjustment for the Department of Planning and Sustainability Community Housing Development Fund Awards, ID number 12142. If I could have somebody move that onto the floor. Moved by Mike, seconded by Travis. So Elliot, I will turn it over to you for that resolution.
Yeah, so DPS is seeking an authorization for a budget adjustment for a couple of Community Housing Development Fund awards that include county funds. So these were made across a couple of rounds from 2020 to 23, and they have a mix of funding from all three of the Community Housing Development Fund partners, including Tompkins County, and for all of these, the county portion of the funding has been authorized by the legislature, but to date, either all of a portion of each of these awards haven't been dispersed due to a variety of project timing reasons. $95,000 of the county portion of these awards have been dispersed for 2 separate projects, but that leaves, that was dispersed last year, but that leaves $310,190 of the county funds undispersed. So we're asking for that amount to be moved to the 2024 budget. And there's a memo with a little bit more information on each of those projects and the award amounts.
Just to summarize, to make sure I fully understand, this is just a budget transfer from one year to the other so that we can have it in the right accounts?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Any questions for Elliot on this resolution? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and start with those on screen. Ann Koreman.
Yes.
Veronica Pillar.
Yes.
Travis Brooks.
Yes.
Mike Sigler.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Elliot, any other updates or anything else from your neck of the woods?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. I see Katie and Megan are also on, but if there's no other comment, we can move on to Nick. And we also have Peggy here from the CVB. Go ahead, Nick. Yep.
Hi. Good afternoon. I have 2 resolutions, one for a negative determination of environmental significance, and then a second for grant awards. So,
And Brittany, the order that we do this in is the order that's on the agenda, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so the first one is a resolution making a negative a negative determination of environmental significance in relation to resolution number of 2024, award of 2023 Strategic Tourism Implementation Grants ID 12144. If I could have someone move that, please. Moved by Travis, seconded by Veronica. All right, Nick, you want to give us the highlights there?
yeah, absolutely. So, we have a grant program through the tourism program called Strategic Tourism Implementation Grants, through which we accept a variety of different proposals. One of which was recommended for funding is for wayfinding signage implementation. After reviewing that proposal, we determined that it was not what's a listed action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and as such required a short environmental assessment form to be completed. So that is on file here with the ledge. And is actually, I believe, in the packet here for review if you have any questions about it. Yeah, so we would, before we can entertain the motion to accept that grant, need to determine that there's no, or determine that there's a negative environmental significance for this project.
Any questions on this resolution? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll. Ann Koreman.
Yes.
Veronica Pillar.
Yes.
Travis
Yes.
Brooks.
Yes.
Mike Sigler.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That moves us on then. That passes unanimously to our, sorry, my screen catching up to my resolution award of 2023 Strategic Tourism Implementation Grants ID number 12123. If I could have someone move that, please. Moved by Mike, seconded by Veronica.
I have to abstain from this vote. I'm an employee at the Greater Ithaca Activity Center.
Which is one of the proposed award recipients. All right, so Travis will be recusing himself from the vote and then ultimately the conversation as well around this resolution. All right, Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks. So, last year in 2023, we did a budget adjustment to bring $500,000 into the budget for strategic tourism implementation grants. This slate of awards represents the recommendation from STPB to award that to 3 different projects. One, we previously discussed, the wayfinding signage and interpretive signage plan, as being led by the Tompkins County Chamber of Commerce Foundation. A second one through my department for the updates to the ithacatrails.org website. And the third one, as Travis mentioned, to the Greater Ithaca Activity Center for the Hospitality Employment Training Program. So in total, these represent $440,000 of grant awards that would be issued. You'll also notice in this resolution there's a budget adjustment to move the funding from 2023 to 2024, as this will give us a little extra time to get those awards under contract and make sure we're doing so in a responsible way. So happy to answer any questions you have about the applications. There's a brief summary included in your packet, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
I'll open it to members of the committee for questions, if there are any. Okay, I guess I am the only one with a question on this one. And it's more of just an FYI. As we talk about wayfinding, which has been a topic of conversation for some time, as those following along have been aware. Can you give maybe an update, or maybe Peggy, maybe best suited either or, of sort of where wayfinding is, what the accumulation of funds, and maybe where some of the shortfalls may continue to exist, or? Yeah,
I can give a brief update. I don't have exact numbers on all of the counts, but late or the middle of last year, the chamber engaged a consultant, Whittam, to basically sort of rescope the plan for wayfinding. They have been looking over that and coming up with some alternative designs and sort of concepts for how to approach wayfinding in the county. So we don't have an exact list of where all the locations are that signs will be placed at this point, because they're still in that rescoping phase. In terms of the dollar amounts, we have, in addition to the dollars allocated through this resolution, a previous budget adjustment on the tourism program allocated $250,000, which is basically sitting in fund balance right now. That's available for a future wayfinding project allocation should it be needed. Part of what we don't know is that the total project cost. That's what Whittam is working on in terms of their rescoping. So as soon as we get that, we'll have a more detailed understanding of the actual estimate of the total budget. So,
Brittany, I think Jennifer Tavares is here remotely. Would it be possible?
I've tried to promote her and she's declined.
Oh.
Try again.
I saw her raise a
Here
hand.
we go.
That's the only reason I.
Yep.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, Jennifer.
I am here, and it didn't actually give me a full invitation to join until just now, so thank you for letting me in.
We're talking about.
I don't have much to add to what Nick said. Everything Nick said is accurate. I would just say there are more other funding partners at the table than there were during prior efforts back in 2016. And we have, I think, significant interest from some other potential funding partners. So, I'm really hopeful that with a rescope project, redesign project, with additional funding allocated from the tourism program, which is the single most important funding source, I think, for this project, that we'll be able to really get this done this year. And we will have signs instead of, we'll be talking about signs after 2024.
Great.
And it'll probably take into next year to install. It'll likely be phased, but we are making a lot of progress.
So it's likely to say, and again, we won't hold you to this, but we'll have significant noticeable progress sometime in 2024.
I sure hope so.
Okay.
I really hope, it's January. We made a lot of progress already on the rescoping. We are expecting budget information and additional funding to continue, coming in line here in the spring. I hope that we're at least to permitting, if not having a clear phased project that we can start installing before the end of this year.
Great. Okay, excellent. Thanks for that additional context. And then my only other comment is it's great to see that GIAC is on here. I know that this was something that came to the legislature as an OTR request, and then we suggested that it may be a better fit for this program. So glad to see that that happened, and appreciate everybody who worked on that to get that through, to make that happen. I think job training and getting people prepared, hospitality training is one of those skills that you can take with you to any industry, and it's a great first job, it's a great career, it's a great retirement job, it's all of those things to many people. So I'm glad to see some job training as a part of this as well. So are there any other questions? If not, we'll go ahead and call the roll on this resolution. All right, we'll start with Ann Koreman.
Yes.
Veronica Pillar.
Yes.
Travis Brooks. Oh, sorry, is abstaining. That's right. And Mike Sigler.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That's 4-0 to 1 abstention. Thank you. Sorry, Travis. just have it. All right, Nick, any other updates or anything from your area?
Not yet, but we'll have a fourth quarter room tax shortly, so we'll report that as soon as we get it in. So,
Anything on the broadband front that's shareable?
We have interviews scheduled with some of the top scoring responders to the RFP later this week. So looking forward to that, and I think we'll have hopefully some clear direction coming out of that meeting and to bring to this committee or its successor. So
great. All right. Well, thanks, Nick. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty. Let me see what else we've got. Any committee members' reports? I see Veronica shaking her head. No. Annie, any committee member? No. Travis or Mike? No. All right. Well, it is 4:07. Everyone enjoy 53 more minutes of your day that you didn't plan on having, and we'll call this meeting adjourned. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.